All right, so if you think that just because you have an APS-C camera, you can only use APS-C lenses, you're gonna have to think again, because the favorite combination I use from a lens and camera combo on the Sony FX30 gives me everything that I want out of that focal length, and on top of that, it's actually made for full frame cameras. So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about the 20mm G lens by Sony. Now this is one of my favorite pairings with the Sony FX30 because it gives me everything from the style of shooting that I want, and I actually use it on a lot of professional situations. Now this lens is going to have a 1.8 aperture. Now that's pretty standard and nothing too fancy by way of being able to use in low light, but it does give you that 1.8. So if you are in darker situations, you're gonna be able to bring up your aperture in order to expose properly. On top of that, you also have an adjustable exposure ring that's on the lens itself, something that you'd find in more expensive lenses, but if I need to change things, make things lighter or darker, and I'm on the fly, I don't have to worry about messing around with my settings too much, and it makes things a little bit easier. The aperture ring you can actually click or de-click as well, so if you want it to be hard stops to actually stop you from messing up your aperture, or you want it to be smooth for easier transitions, you have the option on this lens. On top of that, there's also a custom button that you can map different functions onto it, like locking in your focus while you're running gun and shooting. Now this lens is also super light, and what you would expect from a native Sony lens is the autofocus is really good as well, something that I like to take advantage of while using a camera like the Sony FX30. And the coolest thing about it is it's in the wide angle lens category, but the glass element actually isn't curved. It's flat just like you would see in other lenses. Now this might not mean a lot to you, but when you have curved elements on your lenses, it makes it harder to put things like filters on them. The 20mm 67mm filter thread allows you to use some common filters that you might have from diffusion or ND filters. It makes things less complicated because you're not working with a curved glass element where putting on filters becomes really difficult. Now keep in mind, because you're working on an APS-C camera like the Sony FX30, the 20mm isn't necessarily 20mm exactly. Now the 20mm is made for full frame cameras, and you're gonna get a wider field of view when you're using cameras like the FX3 or the A7 IV. Now with the APS-C camera and the Sony FX30, you're gonna have to multiply that 20mm by 1.5, giving it more of a 30mm type of look. And for me personally, the 20mm works if I need that look that looks a little bit more like a 35mm. And at being at 30mm, it's pretty close to 35, which is a look that I generally gravitate to when I'm shooting things like B-roll, or I'm shooting different promo videos or different interviews and stuff like that. Now, I don't recommend using the 20mm as a vlogging lens because of that crop factor. Things might be a little bit too zoomed in and a little bit too tight for your tastes. Now, I'm not somebody that does a lot of vlogging, so I don't really mind the fact that it does zoom into a 30mm look, but if you're someone that likes vlogging and that's what you're looking into, there's a bunch of different wide angle lenses that might suit you better. There's the 11mm by Sony, there's a 13mm by Viltrox, there's also another lens like the 15mm G lens that's made for APS-C cameras. It might give you the look that you're searching for. Now the 20mm G lens does have some exclusive features on it. On top of the fact that you could map a custom button in it for a variety of reasons, and its variable aperture ring that you could click or de-click, because it's one of the higher end E-mount lenses, you actually get the feature of focus breathing compensation, which is something that you can use on the Sony FX30 to make sure that you smooth out some of the corner bumps that you might see, especially on the G and G Master lens lineup. It still gives you all the quality and all the sharpness that you want, but some of the G Master and some of the G lenses do have that little bump when you're changing in your focus, and focus breathing compensation clears that right up. Now, albeit that does come with a little bit of a crop, and you also might experience some crop as well when you're using the active stabilization. Now for me, in my shooting style, when I want to get a 35mm look, because it's downsampled and it is a little bit sharper of a version of 4K, I don't mind the crop that comes with the active stabilization and the focus breathing compensation. It's going to give me more closer to a 35mm look, but at the same time, I don't find a giant reduction in the quality and the sharpness, but I still get that native Sony look that has all the sharpness and the great color that I'd expect from a lens in this category. Now in terms of autofocus, this lens works exactly the way that you expect it to. Sony native glass is great at autofocusing while keeping its sharpness and its color at the same time. There's nothing too revolutionary about the autofocus nowadays, especially with this high-end glass, because they all work really good. And for me, with my running gun shooting style, when I want to get good autofocus, especially when I'm moving a lot with the camera or my subject's moving a lot, the 20mm doesn't disappoint. Now, the thing with the G and the G Master category of lenses is they're always going to lean to be the more sharper lenses, the more higher quality, the better color. But those are just only some of the reasons why I think this lens is a great addition to your bag for the Sony FX30. But it also gives you the ability to be future-proofed. Now, yes, the Sony FX30 does have an APS-C size sensor, or a Super 35, and some people might not stay in Super 35 forever, but when you upgrade into full frame, you're going to want to start off with some sort of glass that's going to work on your cameras. A lot of people have made that jump from going from APS-C to a full frame camera or a cinema camera, and what ends up happening is if you have all APS-C lenses, you're gonna have to end up selling those and switching those and upgrading them to find equivalent focal lengths to match the cameras that you end up buying anyways. But with a 20mm lens, you're gonna get all the quality that you want. It fits the shooting style that I want while I consider the crop factor, but at the same time, when I'm using my Sony a7 IV or FX6, I don't have to have two sets of lenses in order to have things in my bag, which means overall I'm gonna spend less money on accessories and I'm gonna have more room in my camera bag for other things. So the 20mm lens is one of the favorite lenses that I keep in my bag for the Sony FX30, and albeit the fact that it's not an APS-C lens, do I recommend using full frame glass on the Sony FX30? And the short answer is yes. If you have the funds to afford high quality lenses like any of the G and G Master lenses for your Sony FX30, then it only makes a lot of sense if you're thinking farther into the future to get full frame glass, but just keep in consideration some of the crop factors that you're going to deal with when using the camera with some of those lenses. For me personally, I don't necessarily shoot a lot of wide angle stuff, so using the 20mm on my Sony FX30 works perfectly fine for me. But if you're somebody that wants to keep things a little bit more future-proofed, but at the same time you need wider focal lengths, then just get wider end focal lengths at full frame cameras, so when you upgrade you only have to worry about switching camera bodies and you don't necessarily have to buy an entirely new lens kit to work with the camera you end up upgrading to somewhere down the line. That being said, I do think the 20mm G lens by Sony is something that a lot of people might want to consider using with the Sony FX30 to give you more of that 30 or 35mm look without having to go and find a 30 and 35mm lens. This lens is perfect for a lot of you run and gun shooters, and it is really handy and something that I recommend for everybody, whether you're using APS-C or you're using full frame. That being said, if you like videos just like these, make sure you comment, like, share, and subscribe, or leave a comment down below what your favorite lens is so far on this camera. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.